we have a story. Well, it's actually two stories intertwined. And this week I've come to understand that the intertwining of these two stories is really important, and that they're meant to be together because there's a point that we need to hear in them. And so today I want to look at several similarities between the two stories. This is the story in Mark 5 of Jairus' daughter and the woman with the issue of blood for 12 years. And so there's a lot of similarities, and then there's one difference. And a lot of times in the Bible when you're reading and there's something being compared and there's a lot of similarities and one difference, guess where the point is? It's in the one difference. And so that's where I hope to get today in looking at this story. This is a story about a beloved daughter. There's something about being a parent. Anybody, if you're a parent, do you love your kids? I hope you do. I never understood the love of God as much as I did after I had children. Can you amen that? It taught me so much about sacrificial love, right? I mean, what wouldn't you do for your child? What wouldn't you do to rescue your child, right? It's just, and I communicate this to my daughters. I describe kind of the life I used to have and how Jesus kind of tackled me and wrestled me into a different direction. But I think about, and I try to communicate to them, there was a different path. And that path was leading somewhere that I know was radically different and radically worse than the path that he brought me on. And even if I was a parent on that path I was on, I think it would have been a disaster. I don't have any reason to believe otherwise, because I was a mess. But on this path, I've been so blessed with my family and my daughters. And last week, Tabitha and I were praying together. And after I had prayed, she was praying about some things. And she mentioned, and she thanked God for how much he's blessed her dad's life. And she was realizing, that in my conversation about it, we didn't talk about it then, she just remembered, but she was just thanking God for just blessing me so much and changing my life and giving me a new path. And I was so moved by that and touched by it that after we were done praying, I wanted to remind her that she was at the center of what it means when I say that I'm so blessed. And you too, Mackenzie. She's not here. I love you the best. Just don't tell Tabitha that. But I just wanted her to know that when you say that, when you talk about that, I want you to realize when I'm like on my face before God, recognizing how much he's blessed me, I realize I wouldn't have the relationships, I wouldn't have the family, I wouldn't be the dad and the husband that I am without Jesus. And they need to know that, because they've only known me since I've been with Jesus, so maybe they would think that this is me, but it wasn't. I'm me, like after Jesus kind of pummeled me a lot. And he's still working on me. But this blessing of children, what wouldn't I do for my daughters? What wouldn't I do to rescue them and save them? And in the story, we're going to see a desperation to rescue a daughter. Now I want to read the story. It's a little bit of text. It's like 20 verses or so. So I want to read it. I want to read the story as it intertwines together. And then after that, I just want to look at several similarities and then a difference. And these stories are not only intertwined that they're similar with each other. I hope to show, at least consider, that they're also similar to the human condition, maybe our story. So this is in Mark chapter 5. I'm going to begin in 21. And when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter's at the point of death. Come lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live." And he went with him. And a great crowd followed him and thronged about him. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and who had suffered much under many physicians, and spent all she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. And she had heard the reports about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, if I touch even his garments, I'll be made well. And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And Jesus perceived himself that power had gone out from him, and immediately turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garments?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing around you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house someone who said, "Your daughter's dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. And they came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue. And Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. And when he'd entered, he said to them, "Why are you making such a commotion and weeping? The child's not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. But he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him, and they went in where the child was. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, "Talitha kumi," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And immediately the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years of age. And they were immediately overcome with amazement. And he strictly charged them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. So there's the two stories, intertwined on purpose because we need to know something. So I want to look at some of the similarities first. And the first one I want to toss out, because I don't know what else to do with it. They're both, how long has the woman been sick? How old is the daughter? 12. Why? Is it just coincidence? It could be. Just a coincidence that they're both 12 years sick and 12 years old. At least one person suggested to me that there's a reason that the 12 years, that perhaps this woman was the mom. And giving birth 12 years ago, she never recovered. She had some issue with the birth and ended up, bleeding for 12 years over this. And so there's sort of a family thing going on here, which if it was true, it really plays well for the whole point of the story and the sort of the value of the woman and reconciliation, maybe the guy. There's a lot of stuff there, but there's just not enough information for me to know that. So maybe it's just coincidence. Maybe it really is this family thing. I don't know. Maybe it's just the number 12. The number 12 in the Bible is sort of associated with God's reaching out in reconciliation to the world. Number 12, how many tribes were there of Abraham? Of Jacob, right? There's 12 tribes. And those tribes were to be a what? Unto the nations. A light. They were supposed to reveal what it was to be in community with God. How many apostles were there? 12. Yeah, at first, right? There's 12. But anyway, there's 12 apostles chosen, right? But those were to be God's messengers to take the gospel of Jesus out, right? And so the number 12, the God number 3, sort of the divine number, Trinity, 3 days and nights in the grave. The human number 4, 40 days and 40 nights in the rain, 40 years in the desert, 40 days fasting for Jesus, Moses and Elijah. There's a lot of 4s. You add them together, you get the perfect number 7, the God number, the divine number, something like that, unity between God and His creation. You multiply them, and you got 12, right? So there's a lot of number stuff. Maybe that's it. Maybe it's about that. I don't know for sure, but there's a 12 in both of them, right? So that's an interesting connection. Do with that whatever you can. But these are both healing stories, right? That's an obvious connection. Jairus needs a healing for his daughter, and then there's this woman who needs a healing. There's been a lot. We've been through Mark chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, and part of 5 already, and there's been a lot of healing stories. And sometimes we kind of get focused on that, the physical, Jesus is healing everybody, and that's great. And He is, and it was great for them, but that's not the whole story, is it? Along with these healings, there's been this sort of warrior, rider on a white horse, coming into the world and conquering the dark forces, the demons, the lies of Satan that have been telling people that God doesn't like you. He doesn't like you, and that's why you have leprosy. He doesn't like you, and that's why you have a withered hand or your body's not working properly. He doesn't like you, and that's why you're demon-possessed. He's mad at you. You're getting what you deserve. He doesn't like you because you're not keeping his law right. You're missing some steps, and you don't deserve him, and he doesn't like you. That was the mentality. And we've said Jesus came. He's the one who comes and beats up the strong man and binds him up. Because Satan has taken over in the messages of even God's leaders of his people to tell people, you're not okay with God. And so in all these healing stories, we see Jesus conquering those lies of Satan. And so in these healing stories, we're not just looking for they were healed. That's awesome, but there's something else going on here in these stories that we need to be looking for. So yeah, they're healing stories, but there's something else going on here. And as I said, I believe it's about a father rescuing his daughter. Another similarity, maybe two similarities. Jairus and the woman are both desperate. They're desperate. In fact, I think Jesus is their last hope. And we can see that with the woman. She spent all she had. Now she's poor. She's got no money. She's used up all the doctors. Nobody could help her. And she's poor and she has no other hope. And it's getting worse. I don't think she's on the verge of death. I'm not sure I'm getting that. It's been 12 years. But at least she's getting sicker and sicker. She's getting worse. So he's her last hope. And I think she's desperate. Not just because it's not fun to be sick. But Leviticus 15 says that this woman with an issue of blood is, guess what? Unclean. And anything she touches is unclean. And anybody who touches anything she touched is unclean. How does that work out in celebration times, religious times, festival times? How does that affect her family relationships? Her relationships with the religious community, the synagogue, the celebrations. What's it done to her for 12 years? No wonder she spent all she had. It's ruining her life. And on top of that, people are saying, well, you're getting what you deserve. God doesn't like you. She's desperate. What about Jairus? Is he desperate? His daughter's at the point of death. She's about to die. Now, how'd she get that way, Jairus? Why'd you wait? You ever think about that? Jesus has been preaching in the synagogues. He's been all around. He's been there for a long time. Now, okay, maybe she got sick and to the point of death in an hour or a day. Maybe. I mean, I guess that could happen. But it's not the way it usually happens, right? In my experience, people get sick and then maybe they get well, or they get sick and then maybe they get sicker. And then they get sicker. And then maybe they get well, or maybe they don't, they get sicker. This is the way it works. And at some point, maybe they get to the point of death, right? Where's the daughter when Jairus comes to Jesus? At the point of death. Why didn't he come before? This is where some context. We've been going through the book of Mark. We should know. Why didn't he come before? Well, just speculating a little bit here, but I think the information's in the text. He's a religious leader, isn't he? He's the ruler of the synagogue. He's a respectable man, an important man. What's Jesus' status among religious leaders about now? He's persona non grata, right? He's a pariah. Nobody likes him in that crowd. In fact, the Pharisees and Herodians have already determined to try to destroy him. And so imagine a religious leader thinking maybe he needs to go talk to Jesus. That's not what you do first. But what about at the point of death? Yeah, now, forget about the rest. My daughter's about to die, right? I mean, what's really important now? I don't care about all that. Jesus, maybe he's been in my synagogue. Maybe he healed somebody in my synagogue. I know he can do it. All right, forget about all that stuff. I'm going. Because what wouldn't you do for your daughter? What wouldn't you give up? What would you do to rescue your child? Right? So it looks like, last hope, last resort. And then there's another weird thing. In both of their stories, in their contact with Jesus, people around them don't get Jesus. They don't understand. In fact, Jesus is sort of an embarrassment, or could have been, to them. Like, for instance, with the woman, when Jesus is on his way, and it's like he's in the mosh pit at a concert, which I've never been, but I've been to concerts, but I've never been in a mosh pit like that. But I've seen it, and I've heard that there's no air there. There's not enough oxygen. There's so many people packed together. But he's like in the mosh pit being bounced around by everybody, and he's like, who touched me? And the disciples, and I imagine everybody, is saying, that's a weird question, Jesus. Right? Nobody gets it. Nobody understands what Jesus is doing. Or he gets to the house and all the mourners are there, which suggests to me that there's resources in this house because these are professional things and they bring them in. I know Lazarus had some mourners at his. They had some resources. I don't think there were any mourners at Jesus's. I don't think they had the resources there. It doesn't seem. But anyway, I don't know of any. But this may mean he has resources. But here Jesus gets there and everybody's crying. Why are they crying? Because the daughter died. Jesus was hanging out back there. It's too late. She died. And Jesus says, no, she's not dead. She's just sleeping. And what does everybody do? Anybody remember? They all laugh. Why are they laughing? Is it because they're happy? Doesn't seem like it. They're saying, you're a nut job. People don't get Jesus. And so what I'm saying is, throughout this two stories have so much alike, but they also have a lot alike to a human condition, even to my own story. I was desperate. I didn't even know how desperate I was, but I knew I was desperate when I came to Jesus. Now I know how desperate I was. But the human condition is desperate to be saved, desperate to find value and love and a connection with God is desperate. Even if we don't realize it at first, even if we put other things in the way and try to ignore it, at some point, hopefully, we'll recognize how desperate we are for Jesus. And He's our only hope. That's my story in there. And when I realized it and I sought out Jesus, people around me didn't understand. I played hockey on the base and a roller hockey. Ice skates hurt my ankles. But I played roller hockey, and my friend Danny DiStefano said, Elliot, why aren't you at hockey? And I'm like, well, I'm going to church. Go to church on Sunday. You don't go to church on Wednesday, play hockey. No, I found a new church family. I found a family. I found a place. I found where I belonged. So my life changed. He didn't understand. When I got home, my mom thought I was brainwashed. And I had to say, well, I guess I was. Not in a weird way. Not like they took out the important stuff and put in a bunch of junk. But God took out the junk and put important stuff in there. So I guess I was brainwashed. Praise God for that. But they didn't understand. People didn't understand what Jesus was doing. And I see it in the story. They don't understand. Another similarity, the woman and Jairus both approached Jesus in faith. Maybe not perfect faith, right? If I'm right about Jairus, if he really knew Jesus, who he was, and Son of God, the Messiah, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, he wouldn't have cared what anybody thought, if I'm right about that. He wouldn't have cared. He'd have come right away when his daughter was sick, or at least when she got worse, way before the time when she's about to die, and she is about to die because she did, right? He'd have come. Not perfect faith. And the woman, I don't know, there's different ways I can go with it, but at very least, it seems like she had some kind of idea about Jesus, kind of the magic Jesus or something. If I just touch his coat, it'll work. And I don't know. I don't know what to read into that. But I'm just imagining she doesn't truly understand. I think there's something different she might have done if she truly understood that this was Emmanuel, God with us, walking right there. She may have even had more boldness, like, blind Bartimaeus or some of the others who shouted out, Jesus, heal me. Or even like Jairus. Jesus, there's crowds all around him. Jairus comes and somehow he has access to Jesus. And he doesn't mind getting right in Jesus' eyeballs and say, I need you to come to my house. But not the woman. And so this is where I'm seeing a difference. There's something different going on here. Jairus, for one thing, is a man. And it's a man's world. Men are important. Women, not so much. He's a religious leader. He probably has resources. Maybe the synagogue's in his own home. Jairus, important. City, like a leader. Everybody knows him. He's respected. He probably has studied the law. That's him. He's got everything going for him. And people will part the waters to let him in to talk to Jesus. But what about this woman? We know she's got no money left. She's poor. We know she's been sick for 12 years, bleeding for 12 years. And we know what people believed about sickness. We know they said, hey, who sinned, this guy or his parents? We know what they were teaching. And so the approach to Jesus says something. She just sort of from behind kind of tries to touch his coat. Doesn't get in front of him, it looks to me like she doesn't think she's worth it. She doesn't seem to have the value to put herself in the front and stick her face in Jesus' face and say, I'm important, heal me. She doesn't do that. Jairus does it, but she doesn't do it. In fact, if we remember in the story, Jairus has already come and he's pleading urgently with Jesus, can you come? So somehow people made a way for him and everybody knows he's doing this and now everybody knows where we're going. We're going to Jairus' house. He's important. His daughter's important. She's not important. At least I don't think she thinks she is. And so they're on the way. She must know they're on their way. That guy's house, he's important. But she's desperate. And so if I can just touch his coat. And so she does. And here's what's crazy. Jesus stops. Why? She's already healed. The man is desperate. He doesn't want to lose his daughter. It's like the ambulance is code blue running through traffic and people are partying and we're trying to get there. And you just put yourself in Jairus. See, we already know the story, so forget you know the story and get into the story. Hang out with Jairus. You're hanging with Jairus, and it's your daughter who needs to be saved, and she's important, the most important thing right now, Jesus. And he stops and says, who touched me? Why? She's already healed. No, she's not. No, she's not. He stops. Who touched me? And nobody wants to say, but she knew it. So she finally came and said. And here's the thing. Do you know what Jesus said to her? Anybody remember? He called her something. Daughter. This is the only person in the Gospels Jesus ever calls daughter. Why is he calling her daughter? Jairus' daughter is not the most important person in the world at that moment. She needs to know that. She needs to know she's important. She's loved. She's valued. God loves her. He wants to restore her. Jesus calls her daughter. There was a daughter in this story that was really important and needed to be saved. And she is the one. At that moment, nobody knew that Jesus was going to be able to heal Jairus' daughter after she died. And she does die, and that's a big concern. Jesus, he's going to take care of that. But right now, what has to happen? We're going to stop. We're going to take a moment for the sole purpose of speaking value into this woman. Because she's already been healed of her illness. That was what was important to Jesus at that moment. Church, this is the gospel. This is the good news. Yes, we're sinners. And we've been horrible sometimes. And people are terrible. God's message is, I love you. I hate to see you suffering. I want you to know I'm for you. I'm not against you. I want to help you. And it comes from expressing value. And so God so loved this daughter and you and me that he gave his only son. That's the story. Pray with me. Father, help us to live in these stories in a way that we see you talking to us. Help us to hear your message that you know we're broken. We might not be broken as people who don't know you, but you know we're still broken in some ways. You loved us when we were enemies. You love us desperately now that we belong to you. Help us to remember you still love your enemies. Help us to live in that love for ourselves and for others. If we're feeling like we're not worthy, if we're feeling like we don't belong, if we're feeling like you're against us in some way, Father, I pray you'll heal us of that. Help us to see our story with this woman, that we are that important to you, that you would stop everything to say that to us. And let that love resurrect our lives continually. I pray in Jesus' name, amen.